Member for Kew.
Acting Speaker, and I rise to speak on the Help to Buy Commonwealth Powers Bill 2025. Now, this piece of legislation, Acting Speaker, aims to adopt specific provisions of the Commonwealth Help to Buy Act 2024 and facilitate the referral of legislative powers from the state to the Commonwealth for potential amendments. It has two primary objectives in terms of the Help to Buy Commonwealth Bill, and the first of which is the adoption of the Commonwealth provisions and the referral of that legislative power. The policy itself aims to provide 40,000 homes to scheme participants over 4 years nationally, with Victoria aimed at representing about 10,000 over that 4-year share, which has been calculated on a per capita basis. Essentially, Acting Speaker, this Commonwealth scheme aims to replace the Victorian Home Buyer Fund here in Victoria, which was established by the Andrews Labor government in 2021. Acting Speaker, it feels nearly on a weekly basis now we are debating legislation in this place in relation to housing in particular. We hear nearly on a daily basis from the Allan Labor government that they are focused on solving Victoria's housing crisis. But nothing could be further from the truth. Despite the fact we seem to deal with pieces of legislation here about housing, about the need to provide more homes, more rental properties, and make it easier for home buyers and renters in this state, nothing this government has said or done has made 1 ounce of difference to a Victorian in terms of the housing crisis here in Victoria. We have seen over the course of the past 10 years of this Labor government, the housing crisis get worse year on year. They have stood by and watched this become a crisis in this state, a crisis that comes down to a lack of supply and Victorians now unable to find a place to call home, whether that is in terms of buying their own home or whether it is even finding a rental property in Victoria. So this bill before us today is a bill that aims to confer powers from the Commonwealth to the state and put in place a Commonwealth scheme instead of the state scheme that was put in place a number of years ago, as I said. Now, I'm sure the new Treasurer is delighted that the federal government is picking up the tab here in Victoria, given the fact that this state is heading towards it has record debt, and that record debt is soaring towards $188 billion in the coming years. It is completely understandable that the new Treasurer would be thrilled that the Commonwealth Treasurer is suggesting that he will pick up the tab. But it's also ironic to see this bill before us today, given it confers powers from state Labor to federal Labor, given what we have seen over recent weeks is very public disagreements between the Premier and the Prime Minister. Now, I'm sure many of us in this place read just a couple of days ago, and I quote, that Anthony Albanese is expected to distance himself from Jacinta Allan and her embattled Labor government here in Victoria throughout the federal election campaign. And the article goes on to state that while Labor plans for the Prime Minister to bask in the glow of an unpopular Labor premiers, in very popular Labor premiers in South Australia and Western Australia, the party concedes, the federal party, that it has no option to adopt but to adopt a minimalist strategy when it comes to the Victorian Premier. So, Acting Speaker, perhaps this bill before us today is designed to aid in the implementation of the Albanese government's deeply flawed Help to Buy scheme, is an attempt by the government, the state government here, to try and claw back some favour from their federal colleagues. We know, of course, that this government is going cap in hand to the Prime Minister to get funding for their SRL project, and we know that the Prime Minister has been unwilling to make sure that the federal taxpayer is contributing to that project. So somehow I don't think that, despite the fact that we are on the cusp of a federal election being called, that we are expecting the Prime Minister to go to the Governor-General's residence any day now to call that election. And it's very clear that the outcome of this election is very unknown. Of course, us on this side of the House are very much looking forward to a coalition win at the federal election. And if that does occur, then the Commonwealth Help to Buy scheme will not be proceeding. So we are now debating legislation that is dependent on the outcome of the federal election. It's incredibly premature to be putting this legislation in place, given the fact that we do not know what the outcome of that election will be. Why not wait a few weeks? We're only a few weeks away from election day to see what the outcome is. And if Australians decide to go ahead and risk another 3 years of a Labor government, God forbid, a Labor minority government in this country, then put in place the legislation at this time. Because if we do not have a Labor victory at the federal election, the Help to Buy scheme will not be proceeding. And for that reason, I do support the member for Brighton's reason amendment that all the words after that be omitted and replaced with the words, noting the contrasting position of the two major federal political parties on this policy. This House refuses to read the bill a second time until the outcome of the federal election is determined. But regardless of the timing of this piece of legislation, the federal government's Help to Buy scheme has drawn criticism from many quarters, both left and right, Acting Speaker. Its narrow targeting means it does very little to ease the housing and affordability crisis faced by so many Australians, and particularly here in Victoria. Its price caps mean that most houses in most capital cities are precluded from being eligible. And if we look to the difference in what the Help to Buy scheme offers compared to what the current Victorian government scheme offers, the Federal Parliamentary Library found that based on a median full-time earnings, a paramedic, a registered nurse or a primary school teacher would not qualify under the Help to Buy singles threshold. And of course, we've seen extremely low take-up based on the state-based shared equity schemes have found that Australians, Victorians, are actually just not that interested in sharing their house with the government. This is a very important point, Acting Speaker, is that most Victorians, most Australians, don't want to have the Australian government or the Victorian government on their house title. They do not want to have to share their house with the government. So what this government fails to do is to actually deliver housing options for Victorians, to deliver affordable housing options for Victorians, to make sure that first-time aspirational homeowners are able to get into the housing market in this state. But as I said from the outset, all we hear from this government is announcement after announcement. We had, of course, at the end of the former Premier's time as the Premier of this state, the big housing statement announced. Now, in that statement, we saw a commitment to deliver 80,000 new homes each and every year under the Labor government. Now, that has had to be crab walk back, Acting Speaker, because at its very peak, Victoria has only been able to deliver around 50,000 homes. Yet this government committed to 80,000 homes each and every year, an 800,000 target over the decade. But no longer. That figure has been taken out of all of the material on the housing statement going forward. No longer 80,000 homes. We'll just walk that back. And is it any wonder that we can no longer deliver those homes, with the only thing that this government has delivered in terms of housing in this state is higher property taxes? How on earth this government expects to build the homes, the apartments that they're talking about right across Victoria, in their activity centres, in these high-rise buildings, when if you talk to any property developer in this state, they simply cannot afford to do business here. Now, we know this government can't afford to build them. We know that this government cannot afford to build the much-needed public, social and affordable housing, and they're trying to shift that onto the private sector. But as they try to shift that onto the private sector, they're also putting in place new property taxes, increasing land tax, introducing windfall gains tax. How on earth does this government expect the private sector to deliver affordable housing for Victorians if they are taxing them out of the very market? This is the problem with this government. The only answer they have to every single problem that they have created in this state is to introduce a new tax and punish Victorians instead of delivering what Victorians need.
Member for